Hello and welcome everyone to Evolution of E-invoicing. My name is Regina and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Today we'll be covering UK e-invoicing updates, US e-invoicing drivers, global e-invoicing mandate updates. Before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping items. A friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal tax advice, but we will answer as best we can. On your screen is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review while I continue with some additional housekeeping. We are recording today's event, so if you want to listen to it again or share it with a colleague, you'll receive the recording later today. The console you're looking at can be customized. Please feel free to move or resize the windows. Slides can be resized by dragging the bottom corner or by downloading the PDF slide deck under Additional Resources. The Additional Resources section contains related resources, including the slide deck. There are several ways to engage with presenters and attendees. First, if you have any questions, please submit them using the Ask a Question button. We will try to save time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. You may also submit webinar troubleshooting questions. Second, you can join our attendee chat. Click the icon at the bottom of your screen with two chat bubbles. The attendee chat will appear. We encourage you to introduce yourself, network, and discuss today's topic. Third, you can react to the presentation by clicking on the emoji icon and reacting. If you have any technical issues, there's a question mark icon at the box, or reach out using the Ask a Question button. Today, we're joined by Kate Bowden, Director, Enterprise Solutions Tax Technology. Kate, can you please share a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. So hi, everyone. I am in the product organization at Avalara, Director, Enterprise Solutions, and I've been in the tax and VAT space, doing a variety of different roles for more than 20 years, and more recently, I've dug deep into the e-invoicing space.
Wonderful. And we are also joined by Alex Balf, Vice President E-invoicing at Avalara. E-invoicing and live reporting, excuse me. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alex Balf. I VP of E-invoicing and live reporting at Avalara. I lead our product team for our global SaaS e-invoicing solution. I have been in the international indirect tax space and tax technology space for 20 years this year. I spent around 15, 16 years of my career within consultancy with Grant Thornton and Deloitte. At Avalara, I also lead our relationships with governments, tax authorities, other influencer bodies. I'm on the European Commission's e-invoice advisory group. I'm also on the board of the US's Digital Business Network Alliance, and I work with a number of other major international bodies representing the industry and businesses and acting as a subject matter expert. Great to be with you today, and looking forward to the webinar.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it off to Kate at this point to get us started.
Oh, sure. Thank you. So those of you who are not familiar with Avalara, we are a global company, 14 offices. You'll see spread across the globe, worldwide. We actually have more than about 5,300 employees. We do keep moving quickly in increasing our size and scope to handle indirect taxes for you. And really, we are trying to alleviate the burden of tax compliance for you. We have more than 43,000 customers spread across more than 75 countries.
Thanks, Kate. So before we start, I was just going to quickly showcase our global e-invoicing and live reporting solution. Avalara has been in the e-invoicing space for over a decade now, and has acquired a lot of talent and technology through various acquisitions. But we have our new next generation e-invoicing and live reporting solution. It's global, based on a single API, based on UBL, Universal Business Language. And we have pre-built workflows for around 45 different countries that we support. We have a very aggressive roadmap meeting new major mandates, document types around the world. Like everything Avalara does, we want to make it easier and faster for businesses to comply. So we've designed the product with in-product activation. We know historically a lot of the legacy e-invoicing EDI solutions from our competitors, from the legacy procurement networks, there's a heavy professional services angle. So every time you want to enter a new country, comply with a new mandate, maybe there's a new contract, maybe there's a new project set up with the provider. We provide everything out of the box. For us, a new country, a new document type is merely content. It's within our solution. It's available to you once you license our solution. As I said before, a single global API, regardless of the country, the network, the format that we're producing. And this is built to scale. So, really being built on robust microservices with architecture that allows us to scale into different countries, regions. If we need to meet specific hosting requirements, storage, archiving requirements in a particular geo, we can do that very, very quickly. We were recently named by IDC as one of the leaders within e-invoicing. We're a member of various different bodies from GINA, OpenPEP, certified across the globe and in different countries. So straight into the main webinar now. We're going to kick off with a bit of background just around e-invoicing from the very start. What is an e-invoice? What is not an e-invoice? The benefits. This is the clear direction of travel for countries, tax authorities around the world. But there are also really clear benefits and synergies that businesses can benefit from. And then we're going to look at both sides of the Atlantic, because this really is a transatlantic issue at the moment. We're going to be looking at e-invoicing in the UK, the United Kingdom, the current snapshots, an update on the consultation. And then we are going to flip to the US. So we're going to look at this current state of play in the US, typical barriers for adoption, but also then do a bit of a deeper dive on the new Digital Business Network B2B Digital Highway, which is the new common standard framework for e-invoicing in the US that's going to be a catalyst there. So Kate, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to walk through just kind of some basic definitions here. And this is a set of questions for you to think about. Which of the documents listed below is an e-invoice? So we can look at a scan of a paper invoice, a PDF invoice, something in JPEG or PNG format, structured invoice data exchange. So that can be done via a peer-to-peer network such as EDI, via platforms on a data stick, Zugford format, which is a PDF with some embedded information, or even an email with invoice information. So think about these and try to identify which does qualify as an e-invoice and which doesn't. So the definition is that an e-invoice needs to be in a structured digital format, and it needs to be handled via automated processing. So if you were keeping your own scorecard, you'll see that probably a giveaway was that structured invoice data exchange. But you'll see that as long as it's going via networks, it can be peer-to-peer, it can be via platforms, but that structured data on a data stick does not qualify. That Zuckford format in Germany is an interesting one, where it is a PDF that is transmitted, but inside that PDF there is an embedded electronic formatted e-invoice structured data inside of that. And then, I'll also just highlight that an email, even though that is transmitted electronically, does not qualify as an e-invoice. It is not using that structured machine readable data. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why e-invoicing, why it's sort of taking off right now globally. Lots of governments worldwide are beginning to mandate e-invoicing. And the question is why? Why are they doing that? And it is something that is allowing them to get more information to try to reduce fraud, waste, non-compliance. But there are things that you look at as your company. There is a benefit. You do gain a lot of efficiency. So even in a country where you don't have a compliance mandatory adoption type of mandate, you still can get efficiency improvements with the data exchange handling electronically. And I think the compliance aspect is very clear, that if the government requires it in order to do business, you must ensure that you follow those standards. Okay, so this is a little bit more about those benefits. Again, the efficiencies really give you cost savings. Even if you're sending paper invoices, there's quite a lot of labor involved in that. And even PDF, sending PDF documents can have a bit more labor than this automated transmission. It actually helps with cash flow because these transmissions are happening immediately within the systems. There's no sort of time delay that occurs. Obviously, you get compliance where there are automatic audit trails, so that definitely supports legal compliance in an audit situation. The transmissions are very, very secure. Errors become reduced as well because it is that automated processing. And because of all that, your business relationships, relationships with your suppliers, your customers are much more transparent and efficient. And e-invoicing can also kind of expand this, it says expand global reach. So even cross-border, you can use these e-invoicing transactions. So here's a set of quotes along various experts. You'll see PwC, Belentis, the Australian government, and New Zealand. So what these experts are seeing is there is indeed cost savings. You'll see up to 70% compared to paper billing. The efficiency and the return on investment, Belentis has been seeing it's about 6 to 18 months as a payback period for the cost of your projects to invoke e-invoicing. Reduced errors are very, very clear. The Australian government is seeing this, and New Zealand has highlighted there is much better security here. You don't have as much risk of compromised invoices. Alex, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you for that really good overview on e-invoicing, why governments are introducing it, why businesses are adopting it voluntarily. So, as I said, we're now going to focus in on the UK. The big headline: currently there is no mandate for e-invoicing, either between businesses. We're seeing this across Europe. There's a e-invoicing mandate currently in Italy, in Romania from next year in January, Belgium the following month in February, Poland, and then in September, France. The vast majority of EU GDP, will be covered by an e-invoicing mandate by the end of next year. But in the UK, there isn't. We don't have a clear legislative path to that at the moment. There isn't a general business to government public procurement mandate at the moment. The exception being with the NHS. So particularly England NHS, NHS England, you should be required to issue an e-invoice via the PEPL network. We do, however, because of our VAT system, have more formal legal requirements relating to the issuing, receiving, storing of e-invoices. So they're available, tucked away in various different regulations and public notices. We have the concept of buyer consent in the UK. So this originated under EU law pre-Brexit. This basically means that a customer must agree to receive an e-invoice. A supplier in the UK can't force its customer to receive an e-invoice. And that's because they may not have the technology, they may not have the processes to actually receive that invoice, for example, to read it. That is changing within the EU. And in particular, Germany. Germany removed the concept of buyer consent from January this year. In Germany, should a supplier wish to adopt e-invoicing, as long as they send an invoice that meets the European standard, the customer can't say no. But in the UK, it's still the customer has that right to refuse. And because there's no mandate, there isn't any specifically or explicitly mandated format for an e-invoice. So it could take various different formats. Could be UBL, it could be BIS3 as part of PEPL. Making tax digital for VAT was introduced a few years ago, but in reality didn't actually provide HMRC, the UK tax authority, with any additional data. It was really just around the digital audit trail between a business's, a taxpayer's data and systems, all the way through to that return being submitted. And then the final submission of that 9-box VAT return as a JSON file. We still see many pockets of e-invoicing amongst the private sector, particularly around public bodies, like we mentioned, the NHS. We see a lot of fragmented use of procurement portals, AP portals. I'm sure everyone listening has been asked by a particular customer to go to a portal, to retype information, to upload a PDF, maybe even join and integrate with a procurement portal. Interestingly, there is a British e-invoicing standard. No one really ever talks about this because it's tucked away in legislation, part of retained law that the UK did post-Brexit. There was a lot of copy and paste of European law. And someone really did a kind of search and replace the word European with British. So we actually have a British e-invoicing standard. It completely mirrors the European standard EM 16931. That standard is going to be the foundation for VIDA, VAT in the digital age, which is going to transform e-invoicing across the EU, ultimately leading to mandatory live reporting of intra-community transactions across the EU in 2030, underpinned by mandatory e-invoicing. But by then, most European member states will have domestic e-invoicing in play, meeting that European standard. That standard will evolve post-VIDA to meet the requirements of businesses and of the new digital age. It will be interesting if the UK updates that standard too. So the UK, the government, HMRC, historically were very quiet on e-invoicing. The announcements around VIDA was always, we're monitoring, we're watching what the EU are doing, we're watching, of course, with interest about what other European countries are doing. But actually, it was during the Labour Party conference last year in September that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, soon after being elected into government, outlined a package of reforms to improve the UK's tax system and help fix the foundations of the UK economy. As part of this, it was announced that HMRC would soon launch an e-invoicing consultation to promote its wider use across UK businesses as well as government departments. So that took some people by surprise. We then saw, a full HM Treasury announcement from Rachel Reeves, emphasising that the introduction of e-invoicing can significantly reduce administrative tasks, improve cash flow, boost productivity, introduce automation, and reduce errors in tax returns, all helping to close the tax gap. The consultation will gather input from businesses on how HMRC can support investment in and encourage e-invoicing uptake. So, quite a pivotal moment. The subsequent budget last year, budget 2025, confirmed that it would be released this year. And then finally, on the 13th of February, we received the actual consultation document. This doesn't get into a lot of the detail like we see in some other countries. For example, Spain. Spain has a proposed mandatory e-invoicing law. It may come in around 2027 now. But the recent consultation there really goes into detail on the model, on the format, on the syntax. We're not at that stage yet. This is really phase one for the UK government, looking at the current usage, looking around barriers, looking about the perceived benefits, and starting to just ask a few questions about different models that could be available. So this was the announcement, one of the headlines within the consultation. Interestingly, it's the Department for Business and Trade as well as HMRC. And I think this is important. As Kate said, e-invoicing doesn't just bring benefits to a tax authority, it brings benefits to businesses. It helps facilitate trade. So that's a great thing here to see the DBT involved. So this is to support development of a UK approach. As I said, this is phase one. There will be no immediate change in response to this consultation, and responses as part of the consultation will be used to inform future decision making. So obviously HMRC, the government, are looking at this very seriously. They're taking this consultation very seriously. But I don't expect we will see any invoicing mandate straight away. I think, as we saw with Making Tax Digital, there will be notice, there'll be further consultation, and the devil will really be in the detail. Quite a number of questions that are set out that HMRC wants feedback on. I haven't replicated everything here, but I'll put a few here just to show you the thought pattern. So looking at average processing time, the cost per invoice, maybe level setting here so the government can calculate the benefits. Reference to MTD, Making Tax Digital. So looking at, is bridging software currently used? Maybe that's looking at, a company's just using bridging software from Excel as opposed to actually using APIs direct from ERPs. Looking at different standards, suggestions on what a preference would be, what would work well. Would a single standard encourage uptake? Generally, most countries will have one invoice format and standard that is part of a mandate. Sometimes we see different flavors. In France, from September next year, there are 3 core formats: the UBL, Universal Business Language; CII, the cross-industry invoice; and FactorX, the hybrid PDF A3 that's both machine readable but also readable by a person too. So this is interesting. For those of you who are interested in participating, need to be quick. The consultation formally ends next week on Wednesday. So do please have a read through, and we all look forward to looking not only at the summary of responses, but where the UK goes next. Notwithstanding the consultation, part of the UK and British businesses will still be compelled to adopt e-invoicing, and that's because of VIDA, VAT in the Digital Age. Post-Brexit, Northern Ireland has a unique relationship with the EU, particularly for supplies of goods. So technically, and this has been confirmed at the moment by the Commission and also the UK HM Treasury, Northern Ireland businesses trading in goods with the EU will be brought in within the scope of VIDA. They will need to do digital reporting in near real time for intra-community transactions. That will ultimately replace the EC sales lists in 2030. And those transactions will need to be underpinned by mandatory e-invoicing. In addition, some European member states will extend the scope of an e-invoicing mandate to businesses that have a VAT registration within the country. So Hungary has live reporting, Spain SII live reporting. Those are covered for non-residents as well. Romania is a mandate that's also brought non-residents within the scope. So really important. And in addition to having VAT registrations being caught within a mandate, a lot of UK multinationals will already have a presence in countries that have a mandate today or will do in the next couple of years. Just to finish off in the UK, I just wanted to highlight the E-invoicing Advocacy Lab. Avalara is a founding member with a number of other service providers, interesting parties from across different industries, including the financial service sector, ERP ecosystem. This not-for-profit voluntary group has already submitted a consultation, but we've also recently issued a white paper. This predated the announcement on the consultation, but there's some lots of good information there. Please Google search or wherever you get your search from, and you can read and download it. So we're now going to cross the Atlantic to the US. And the US is very different. I'm not, talking about what's going on at the moment in terms of tariffs, duties, the latest at a federal level from Donald Trump. Actually, the US is a collection of states. So I'd see this more akin to the EU than a national single country. And the important thing here is for e-invoicing, tax is not and won't be the driver. There is no government authority to establish a nationwide framework or to mandate e-invoicing, neither at a federal level or a state level. US Congress, so a federal government, can only regulate interstate transactions between states, Florida to California, for example. They can only look at foreign commerce. But really, the rules that happen within a state are governed by state legislation. And that's also reflective of the tax system too. So, when we're talking about mandates and tax authorities within the EU, there's generally only ever one indirect tax, a federal VAT, a GST, charged, collected, legislated by the federal government. But the US doesn't have a federal indirect tax system. It's one of the only countries in the world that doesn't, maybe the exception of Hong Kong. That means that there are no input tax credits like VAT or GST. So the invoice plays a very different role. And therefore, we don't see formal tax invoice regulations at a federal level. There's a lot of detail, a lot of requirements at a state level. And we're going to talk about that complexity in a minute. So just to level set, no business-to-business mandate at a state or federal level. We probably won't see a mandate in the near future. There's more commercial freedom for US businesses for the invoice content, how they present sales tax, and what data and fields are presented to customers. As I said before, some states, particularly Texas, Florida, will have very specific rules in terms of how different state and local taxes are broken out and presented, or how an exemption is shown. We see a variety of procurement AP networks, often at the request of larger customer, the power of the buyer. We have seen some business to government action. There was a directive of the Office of Management and Budget that said federal administrations should digitalize. They should receive e-invoices. It hasn't fully been implemented by all federal agencies. So because of all of this, adoption is relatively low. Why is that? Well, it's a very complex and diverse environment and ecosystem for e-invoicing. Multiple formats, different portals, platforms, networks. We still see a lot of legacy peer-to-peer EDI that just isn't scalable and lacks the ability for interoperability between different systems, different businesses. We see 25 billion invoices issued a year, but actually the percentage of e-invoices is pretty low. There are over 250 providers of e-invoicing in some form, but very difficult for interoperability. Often those providers will require the counterparty, the trading partner, to also be a customer of that service provider, or they will force you to go to a portal, change your process, upload an invoice, or retype it in. There are over 15 different core formats of e-invoices in the US, and when you look at subsets, it's over 40. So no harmonized way of e-invoicing, a real lack of interoperability, a lack of harmonization. The majority of businesses, send PDFs. We still see a lot of paper, and in fact, Kate, I'm looking at you here to see if you smile. We still see a lot of large businesses still send checks. That they will settle checks in the mail, to a central processing center. And one of the barriers to more automated, faster payments has actually been the lack of digitalization within the billing process. What progress are we seeing? Well, at a state level, we're seeing some state level organizations to create uniformity, particularly around e-documents. We've started to see this within the payment sector, payment codes with NACHA, the FTA, state tax agencies, but not necessarily at an invoice level. I love this quote from the BPC. So this is the Business Payment Coalition. This is a working group organization, not-for-profit, that was set up with the support of the Federal Reserve banks. They did a big report on the state of e-invoicing in the US. And it says the lack of interoperability creates headaches for end users. Often US businesses interested in electronic invoicing are required to integrate directly with their trading partner system, EDI, point-to-point, the legacy approach, or join a network to which their partner belongs, resulting in an additional cost burden to that business. It disrupts business as usual. It's a different process. It's costly, and there's no real benefit for the business that's forced to do that. So the BPC that I mentioned before was involved in a market pilot to develop a common standard, a common framework in the US to break down those barriers, to foster interoperability through a common network, a common highway, so to speak, between businesses. So this was formed by the Digital Business Network Alliance, DBNA. Once the market pilot was a success, the result was a production exchange standard. So this is built on UBL, a common global standard, but then using code lists that are used by US companies and meet the requirements of American industry. This means that using this format, using this standard, using certified providers on the DBNA, there is no need to connect directly to your trading partner systems. No need for EDI. Let's leave that to the previous decade or century. No need to log into or join the same service provider as your customer or supplier, because it's an open, decentralized network. It's a four-corner model, a bit like Peppol in the EU and APAC. No roaming fees. You can send an invoice to any of the members of the network, and it's instant interoperability between all the different service providers. Every service provider is connected to each other. We all have the right digital certificates, the right secure protocols, and there's no additional fees. So as I said, built on Universal Business Language 2.3, which is a good global common standard. This is both sending and receiving. You need to appoint one service provider who acts as your access points to the network. Each business is identified with a unique ID. This is called your Digital Business Network, DBNA ID. Different choices in terms of how you form that unique identifier. In the US, the DUNS number is common, or the EIN number, which is the federal tax number to identify the business. I mentioned the DBNA. I'm also on the board of the DBNA. It's an independent, not-for-profit company. So it's very different from a lot of the e-invoicing mandates that are run by tax authorities, run by federal bodies. This is really an alliance of different service providers coming together under the umbrella of a not-for-profit. So no government influence, really built for businesses. As I said at the very beginning, tax is not the driver in the US. However, tax is very, very complex in the US, and we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. And therefore, as this was being designed, one of the key requirements is to solve the problem of state and local taxes at different levels. In terms of members of the DBNA and representation on the board, some very big providers. I mentioned Avalara, SAP, Microsoft are also on the board, also looking to help deliver this for their customers. Just last month, Oracle NetSuite, Evan Goldberg, their founder, announced that that NetSuite would also connect to the DBNA network and provide that service for its customers too. So we should see this grow organically because it's breaking down the barriers with a common standard. So when I mentioned the US tax system was complex, I mentioned there wasn't a federal VAT or GST, but that's only half the story, because the complexity is, okay, there's not a single federal indirect tax. The US isn't just a single tax jurisdiction. There are over 13,000 different sales and use tax jurisdictions across the US. So tax at a state level across 50 different states, the District of Columbia, even the US territories have their own tax rules. You can have tax at a county level, at a municipal level, and it gets even more granular and niche than that. So special districts, special individual jurisdictions, even tribal areas. Kate, I'm going to pass over to you now. Like, you come across this, every day, working, with customers, working with big ERPs. Just give me your perspective on this.
Yeah, so I would say you did a great job of explaining sort of the complexity here. Yes, there are so many, over 13,000 different types of jurisdictions, and it's really very interesting. even how each of the states approach taxation. Colorado approaches it very differently than, say, Minnesota or Massachusetts, where they really do have each local jurisdiction down to city level has their own version of taxation. California is another kind of complicated one. I think I mentioned Minnesota and Massachusetts just have a rate, just one single rate, and don't add on all these lower rates in there. This is definitely something that using a tax engine is very, very helpful when you're doing business in the United States. And when we take a look at this e-invoicing, having this sort of interoperability, allowing many more businesses to utilize what some of the larger businesses have utilized with EDI to allow those cost savings. What is, I think, really interesting is how DB&A sort of tackled allowing for all of these things to happen. This is really quite complex. So I think it's pretty amazing that the DB&A process was able to do something at this scale. One of the other things that isn't really mentioned here is the complexity around exemptions. So when you compare to VAT, you have sort of a program where you get to deduct the taxes that you pay, that input tax credit, against the taxes that you collect. In the US, it takes a different approach where if you are purchasing something you're going to resell, there's exemptions right at the beginning. Manufacturing may have a partial exemption or a full exemption when you're doing those purchases. So it can get very complex. I don't know, was that helpful color that
Yeah.
you were looking for there, Alex?
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely perfect. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. You have this complexity as well on the calculation side, on the sales side. We also have this concept of use tax on the purchase side, where you may have to self-assess for a tax, a bit like the reverse charge for VAT. And then you have this additional complexity about exemptions. Think of an exemption almost like an intra-community exemption, where you may need a VAT number for that to be valid, for you to have that on file, have that on the invoice, to zero rate or exempt a transaction. Very similar in the US. If you don't have an exemption certificate that meets the requirements in your hand on file, you can be assessed for that tax, by a tax authority. But it's not just the number of jurisdictions; it's also the number of different tax types. So on the screen now, I've got some edited highlights, just a few, just to give you an idea of the range of different taxes in the US. So for this reason, PEPL, the European e-invoicing standard, even the new international PEPL international standard, probably isn't the right fit for the US, just given the wide range of tax jurisdictions, but also the vast range of tax types. So the DB&A uses Universal Business Language, UBL, but then it leverages X12. So X12 is a standards agency in the US, and it has various codes to identify in a harmonized manner different things. So the DB&A is leveraging this for tax types. So the DB&A actually supports 104 different tax types on the e-invoice using this list. Kate talked about the different exemptions. Again, the DB&A supports 34 different exemption codes, each with a unique way of identifying that exemption. So that's going to improve and enhance reporting, booking into the ERP, audit, defense, as well as helping with wider automation. And then the standard also supports tax amounts, rates, types at a line item level. And this ultimately gives machine readable content that can be used for wider end-to-end automation within indirect tax and also just within AP. So the exchange framework that's governed by the DBNA Alliance, that has the standards, the policies, the protocols that ensure interoperability, that create a common nationwide standard. But for businesses, the ability to connect once to one service provider, one access point, and then automatically be able to send and receive to trading partners across the network, across the country, across North America, even across the globe. That connect once mentality is really, really important. Very similar to Peppol. I mentioned Belgium as being one of the big e-invoicing mandates next year. From January next year, every single business in Belgium will need to transact on the Peppol network. Very similar model, four corners. We're starting to see some countries like Singapore, the UAE, add a fifth corner, where they'll also include tax reporting to the government, to the tax authority as part of a four-corner network. But for the avoidance of doubt, there is no government involvement within the DBNA. Tax authorities don't see invoices or data. This is purely B2B, business to business. So that is the end of me talking about kind of domestically what the DBNA have been doing, the kind of common current state of affairs within the US and the UK. It's now interesting to see what's happening cross-border. You remember I mentioned the US federal government can legislate for international trade. So actually last year on the White House website, there was an announcement about e-invoicing, which I found very interesting. Being very interested in the subject. This was of course under the Biden administration, but there were trade talks between the US and the EU, the Trade and Technology Council, and one of the areas that they've been discussing, as well as broader international issues, is e-invoicing and the lack of interoperability between the EU and the US. So there's various working groups now working together to reach a level of interoperability. How can we move closer to aligned standards between the EU and the US to enhance cross-market transactions, dynamics of transatlantic trade? So obviously a new administration now with Trump, but something I think we're going to continue to watch with interest, and hopefully this is something that's going to be part of any broader trade agreement, not only the US, EU, but also UK, and with other trading regions, countries across the globe. So that wraps up the formal presentation on the UK and US e-invoicing. Just a reminder before we jump into questions, an overview of the products, the solutions that Avalara provides. We have core products to cover the complexity of US and global indirect taxes. A lot of the things Kate mentioned earlier: exemption certificate, management, tax calculation, sales and use tax, VAT, other taxes including customs duty, very hot right now due to all the tariffs. We provide tax returns and reporting, not only for sales and use tax, but also VAT and some other more niche taxes. And of course, e-invoicing and live reporting, supporting e-invoicing in around 50 different countries. We have a number of supporting products, including HS code item classification for customs duty and import VAT. We have tax research solutions. We have engines to calculate cross-border duty and import VAT. We can support with 1099 and W9 documentation, property tax as well. And then this is built on the whole ecosystem of our rich integrations, so connectors, integrations with a huge ecosystem of partners, major ERPs, marketplaces, point of sale solutions, about 1,300 signed integrations around the globe. So I think now we're going to have a look to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, right before we do that, we have just one poll question for everyone. Whether you'd like a follow-up from an Avalara sales representative, you can take your time and just click yes or no. But we will go into, that'll just stay on your screen, and we'll go into some questions. Some of the questions that we did have were answered throughout the presentation, but we do have something from Corey noting some mandates, e-invoicing mandates in Germany, and they need to be able to send and receive by 2026. So they use NetSuite, and wondering if Avalara offers, excuse me, offers a complete e-invoicing solution that integrates with NetSuite.
Okay, I'll take both parts of that question. So Germany, absolutely, a big mandate coming into play. Germany's done this in a phased approach, quite different to a lot of other EU member states. First thing they've done is remove the concept of buyer consent. So from January this year, every business in Germany, every single company must be in a position to receive an e-invoice that meets the European standard. So the Ex-Rechnung, the Zugferd PDF A3, or a Peppel Biz 3 invoice meeting the German requirements. Some businesses have invested in technology already. Some are, merely using a kind of sticky plaster approach, creating an inbox to receive those documents as an email attachment. Not really scalable, sustainable, probably not compliant. But really, this is leading up to a much broader mandate from 2027, 2028, where we will see mandatory e-invoicing within Germany on the send side as well. So people obviously looking at their ERPs, that's business as usual processes. Question here about NetSuite. Does Avalara offer a complete e-invoicing solution that integrates with NetSuite? We do. It's actually a NetSuite suite app. So Avalara powers NetSuite e-invoicing, but receiving e-invoices, generating Zugferd, Ex-Rechnung, exchanging on Peppel network as well. That is all covered within Avalara ELR that will be available from NetSuite through their suite app. We've got a number of connectors, adapters with major ERPs, Oracle Cloud, SAP, Workday, Microsoft Dynamics, Stripe, Epicor, and a number of different providers. So if you want to learn more, please do reach out. We can arrange for demos as well. I think one thing to mention there is historically, businesses' relationship with e-invoicing has been almost a parallel process. Logging into portals, recreating an invoice within an app, within a portal. Because e-invoicing is becoming so mainstream now, you really need to keep it business as usual. It needs to be integrated into your native workflows, into the ERP. You don't want to do too much transformation of your data elsewhere in middleware, within an e-invoicing solution. You still want that audit trail direct from your ERP. You want to accept, reject, provide payment statuses, interact with an invoice and trading partners as close to business as usual as you can.
All right, we have
Kate,
another
anything...
question.
Yep.
Yeah, we have another question from Kirsty. When France, Italy, Poland go live with their mandate for e-invoicing, is this just domestic within the EU, or is it the requirement to send e-invoicing to companies within the UK?
Really good question. There's often a lot of confusion here. So where do we start? So let's say Italy, because Italy has had a mandate from 2019, very broad. It includes business to business, business to government, even B2C sales, consumer sales. So Italy, e-invoicing covers invoices that are issued from Italy to outside Italy, so international sales like to the UK, but also inbound to Italy, so the rest of the world into Italy. The good news is it's more the requirement of the Italian sender. So if the Italian business receives an invoice, it's up to them to translate that, convert it into the Italian format, and report that to the Italian tax authority. Likewise for outbound, yes, that outbound is covered, but Italian businesses will issue a PDF version. They will issue a human readable version of that invoice to a UK company. France, bit of complexity there depending on the use case, but that will cover UK companies with a VAT registration for certain supplies there covered by e-reporting. For cross-border export sales, while that may be covered by the actual e-reporting, I wouldn't expect a French business to issue a UBL CII invoice to a UK business. They probably will issue a Factor X, a PDF that can be understood, read, and processed by a UK business. Poland as well. It won't. The actual requirement to receive won't be impacted by UK businesses, but we will expect a lot of Polish businesses to actually, still issue international invoices through KSEF, but issuing a PDF to UK companies.
All right, we have one more question from Eno. Does Isle of Man have e-invoicing mandates, or do we fall under UK e-invoicing mandate as we file on HMRC?
Yep. So interesting question. So the Isle of Man administer VAT in the Isle of Man, so it's administered by them rather than HMRC. I think this is to be confirmed. We aren't close to a mandate in the UK. I would expect the Isle of Man to follow what HMRC does in the UK, and it would simply be the same or a very similar model within the Isle of Man. We sometimes see that, around the world too, particularly with Italy and San Marino.
All right. Thank you so much. Let's continue on with just some housekeeping as we close out our webinar today. What you see on your screen is some upcoming webinars that you can find at avalara.com/webinars. We have a weekly webinar series on trade and tariff updates. It's every Tuesday. We encourage you to check that out. Also coming up in May is Protect Your Business License and Property Tax Risks and Opportunities, Know Your Nexus, and Are You on the Hook for Communications Taxes? You can register for all of those and more on avalara.com/webinars. To close out, you'll receive a post-event email later today with a link back to this console to view the on-demand recording, slide deck, and the additional resources. We hope to see you back soon. I want to thank our speakers and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.